Welcome to the video demonstration for the first lab in the FortiAnalyzer course, Initial Configuration. My name is Bob Cunningham. I'm an instructor here at Fortinet. In this video, we'll look at the basic setup for your lab environment, including updating the firmware, the operating system, of the firewall, and loading the appropriate configuration file. Before we get into this in too much detail, let's take a look at the topology we're going to be using. This is what it looks like, and we have a lot of equipment out here, but the most important ones for you and I on these labs include your internal segmentation firewall, your local FortiGate, your remote FortiGate, the star of our show, the FortiAnalyzer, and then this box right here, the local client. The local client is the desktop we're going to use to go to and open up a web browser so that we can log in via the GUI to the various devices here. So that's our basic environment. Let's take a look now at, this is the front end to our lab. And our various devices we talked about, the local FortiGate, the local client, the internal segmentation firewall, the remote FortiGate, and the FortiAnalyzer are all accessible here. We're going to start with the client. So we'll click on that, and then we can see the power is on, so we have to click on display, and it will take a few seconds for that to pull up. Now we're going to open up a web browser. And we'll type in here. Now, we could use these links, but I'm going to go ahead and show you HTTPS 10.200.3.1 is the IP address of the remote FortiGate. So we'll start with that one. We'll get a warning here because we're using private certificates. So we're going to go ahead and click Advanced. And it says, warning that we don't trust the certificate because it's not part of the certificate authority. It's not part of our certificate store. So we're going to go ahead and accept that risk and say, let's go ahead and do this anyway. The username and password on all these boxes will be admin, and the password will be password, which is more secure than my home network where I have set up on all my passwords. The password is incorrect. That way, if I type in something wrong and it pushes back and says, your password is incorrect, I'll know what the password is supposed to be. I don't recommend that. Let me try one more time. Must have fat-fingered that. Wasting my time, your time, telling silly jokes instead of... Okay, now we're in to the remote FortiGate, which you see up here labeled as remote FortiGate. First thing we want to do is to get the proper operating system. So we're going to go to System over here, Dashboard, scroll down to where it says System. And here under System, we're going to look at Firmware. And we're going to browse for the proper firmware. And we're looking for a file that says resources. There we go. Would have been a snake, would have bit me. Resources Analyzer, FortiGate firmware. And here is the version of firmware we're looking for. And we'll choose to backup, config, and upgrade. Back up the configuration and upgrade. It'll cause the system to reboot. I'm going to click continue, and then I'm going to pause this so you don't have to sit there and wait while it reboots, and we'll restart the video once the system is actually rebooted. Okay, it looks like we have finished rebooting. Let me go ahead and log back in here and confirm that. And we'll do this later. And we don't care about the new features right now. And we're back in. So now it's time to do the same thing on 2 additional firewalls. The local FortiGate, which is at 10.0.1.254. Same error, of course. And we're going to come back over to System. And we're going to go to Firmware. And we're going to go ahead and browse and look for that Resources tab file on the desktop. Open that up for FortiAnalyzer and the firmware image. And click Open. And then back up. Continue. And we don't need this, but I'll save it anyway. System's rebooting. So let me go to the other system here. The last one, which will be the internal segmentation firewall, which is 10.0.1.200. Password. And here also we're looking for the System tab, and we're looking for the firmware. And we're going to browse, and we're going to the Resources file, FortiAnalyzer, firmware, open, and back it up and upgrade, continue, and I will save that. And I'm going to go ahead and pause here and clean up the other pieces, because you don't need to see me go through and say, no, I don't want to see the new features and that sort of thing. All right, we're back. All the firewalls have been updated with the proper operating system firmware. Before we start in on the configuration files, though, one thing I wanted to mention is when you reboot the firewall and you're connected to the GUI via a browser, after the appropriate amount of time, in a VM world, there's just a couple of minutes. After the appropriate amount of time, you're going to want to refresh the browser in order to get the login screen. Otherwise, it'll just stay there forever saying rebooting system. Okay, now back onto the configuration file. Now we've got the operating system. We need to update the configuration file with the appropriate configuration file for this lab. And so we're going to go to Admin, Configuration, and Restore. And we're going to go to Upload. And once again, we're going to be looking on the desktop for the Resources folder. and FortiAnalyzer, Lab1, and we're currently on the remote FortiGate, so we're looking for the remote FortiGate initial configuration. Open that and click OK. It'll warn us that it's going to cause another reboot. And we click OK. And now we'll do the same thing for the local admin config restore upload to the desktop resources and FortiAnalyzer Lab1, and this time we'll identify the local FortiGate. Open, click OK. OK, and we'll do the same thing on the ISFW. We'll come over here to admin system configuration restore and upload from the file on the desktop for resources, FortiAnalyzer Lab1, and this time ISFW initial config, and click open. OK, and this will also reboot. Once again, I'm going to just go ahead and pause this while it reboots and I get enter the proper passwords in here so that you don't have to waste your time watching it happen. Welcome back. At this point, we have updated the firmware on all three firewalls and installed the configuration file we're going to need for the rest of the labs, or at least this lab. At this point, we want to dive into our FortiAnalyzer. So I'm just going to go ahead here and open up a new tab and use the pre-configured bookmarks that we have up here for each device. So I'm going to click into the FortiAnalyzer, and it asks me for a username, which shockingly will be admin, a password, which equally shockingly will be password. Now, we want to do some examination of both the CLI and of the GUI. Let's start with the CLI. I could log into the command line in a couple different ways. I could log into the console port. And in fact, the VM environment that I'm using allows that. I could open up on the desktop, open up a PuTTY, which is on this desktop, and use that. I could use it's a Unix-based system, Linux, so I could open up the command window, a terminal session, and log in that way. Instead of all those methods, though, I'm going to use my favorite, which is on the upper right-hand corner is a symbol that looks like a prompt. It's got a greater than sign, a little underscore. I'll click on that, and now I've got a console port there. If I want that console port to expand, so it takes up the entire screen, which will be useful for us, I can just click on this this little button here that says detach, and that's going to open up a new tab. See, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 tabs up here. This will create a 5th tab, and that 5th tab has nothing but the prompt, the CLI session. So let's start with the get system status command, and we see things like the platform. It's a FortiAnalyzer. It's a VM. We see the build, the serial number, the host name, number of ADOMs. We'll talk more about ADOMs in the next lab. The current date and time, the time zone, and the license setting. Do we have valid licenses that they expired? Show system interface shows us the active interfaces, their IP addresses, what protocols that are allowed on that port. That is, what protocols can terminate on that port. Ping, HTTPS, SSH, HTTP, and the same for port 2 and port 3. We might look at the show system DNS. And we see a primary and secondary DNS set there. Now, to see if we have the network time protocol enabled, we could use a slightly different command, get system NTP. And that's going to tell us down here that, in fact, it's enabled, and it goes out there and syncs every 60 seconds. And then finally, show on the NTP, show system NTP. And that's going to let us know what the NTP server is set at. And then one last thing, we're going to look at the routing table with the show system route command. And it lets us know that we've got a route set for port 3. It's set for the destination network of 10.200.3/24. And its default gateway is 10.200.1.254. To examine some of the options we have, some of the things we can look at here on the GUI, we're going to take a look at the system settings tile. So we'll click on that. There we are. And we can see here under system information, we can see many of the same things we saw under the get system status CLI command. The host name, serial name, platform type, the when it was last backed up, the amount of uptime, a lot of information there is available for us. If we wanted to get more details on, let's say, the time, we might look at the system time, click on the edit button for that, and we see that the system time, the time zone, we synchronize with a NTP server. Here's the NTP server. Here's the time for that. If we go over to network, we can see here some of the stuff we saw before. The port 1. Here's the address, is the mask. Here are the protocols that you can terminate on that interface. You can click on the all interfaces view to see a brief description of all the interfaces, and then drill down on, say, port 3 or port 2. You could click, still on the network tab, we could click here on the routing table and get a view of that same routing table information we looked at via the CLI. And this brings us to the end of Lab 1. In Lab 1, we've looked at configuring both the firewalls and the FortiAnalyzer with the base configurations they'll need for subsequent labs. We've examined the FortiAnalyzer and looked at some of the settings via the CLI as well as the GUI. Please join me for Lab 2, where we'll take a look at administrative domains and configuring administrator authentication. I look forward to seeing you then.